Good evening, morning, afternoon, night, wherever it is, whatever it is, wherever you're at. I'm a little sick. I've been sick for about a week, but I'm going to try to push out a video kind of explaining the similarities and differences of a four-stroke to a two-stroke and the benefits of each and the downfalls of each. Now, the main difference between a four-stroke, this is a four-stroke, and a two-stroke is there's valves in the combustion chamber, and it's just got valves as like tappet valves, where a two-stroke, this is a two-stroke valve. It is a reed valve, which these are the reeds. These little plastic flaps are the reeds, and it sits pretty much on the bottom of the bottom end. But I will explain that in a second. A four-stroke, it has four strokes. You can see whenever you turn the motor over, the valves. And right here, this is the top dead center, and the intake stroke. And power stroke is whenever it pops. Now it's exploded and it goes down. And on the out, this is the exhaust stroke, which pushes the gases out. And now it's back at top dead center, and it's on the intake stroke. It sucks the fuel in, closes up. Power stroke, bam, it fires, forces the piston down, comes back up, and pushes the exhaust out, and then it's ready to go again. The valves are, there's behind here in this little circle spot, there's a cam, and there's a gear right here that is the motors turning. This shaft turns the cam gear, which has these little tear-shaped pieces, two of them, one for the intake and one for the exhaust. And as that gear spins, it pushes on a lifter, which is attached to a spring. Well, it's butted up to a spring, and the spring is actually attached to the valve. And right here is the intake cover, or the valve cover. And I don't know if you can see. Pull this thing. Maybe, yeah, there it comes. I don't know, you can kind of maybe see a spring in there. This is an old engine. But this, a four-stroke, has 4 strokes, and 1 out of the 4 is a power stroke. Now this makes 4 strokes a little more efficient in fuel consumption, because only 1 of the 4 strokes is a combustion stroke or power stroke, but they don't produce as much power, which is where the two-stroke comes into play. A two-stroke has no valves in the combustion chamber. It's on the side of the cylinder. And that's where this thing comes into play. The reed valve, reed block, is in the side of the crankcase, and whenever the piston goes down, it causes a pressure. It causes a positive pressure in the crank, and in the two-stroke, there's holes in the cylinder walls, and that positive pressure builds up in the crankcase, and whenever the piston goes down and it uncovers the hole right there, then that positive pressure shoots up, which causes a negative pressure behind the reeds, which pulls this way, which opens the reeds up. They open up and they let fuel air mixture into the crank. And then it goes from the crankcase into the combustion chamber. And then on the travel up, it blocks off that hole, that port. And then it is compressed where it fires at top dead center or just shy to top dead center. And then that is the power stroke, and then the piston is forced down where there's another hole on this side. That is the exhaust port, and it pushes out. And I think somewhere, yeah, right here. This is an old weed eater, or no, this is my chainsaw cylinder. Which you can see right there is the exhaust port, and right there is the intake port. This chainsaw, actually I have the piston for it right here. Somebody had taken this chainsaw apart, and whenever they put the rings onto the piston, they put it on upside down. As you can see, that little divot down below that pin is supposed to be along with the pin. That way that the ring can expand and contract with the heat of the piston. As the piston expands, the ring compresses, and it pretty much just takes the place of the piston until it can expand to its full capacity and take up the space of the cylinder. And it allows, or it doesn't allow, blowback or from the compression end up here, the face of the piston, and it doesn't allow blowback it doesn't allow it to get past back down into the crank. But that's how a two-stroke is similar and different from a four-stroke. The benefits of a two-stroke is power. This piston here is a 50cc two-stroke high output engine. But as you can see, the piston and the connecting rod are very similar, and this is a very short connecting rod. And if you look here, this is another one. This is a weed eater piston. They're short connecting rods compared to the sleeve or skirt of the piston itself. But if you look at this four-stroke piston, this is out of a lawnmower, it has a much longer connecting rod, which if you have a longer piston rod or connecting rod, whatever you want to call it, then you get more linear travel or vertical travel. And whenever you get more vertical travel, you get more torque. That is why a four-stroke has more torque than a two-stroke. A two-stroke has very little travel. It's usually under 2 inches, or if you're on a dirt bike, just shy of 2.5 inches. As a four-stroke will have a 3 or 4 inch travel, and that don't sound like much, but that is a pretty big substantial difference. And having a shorter travel allows for quicker up and down, which allows the piston to fire. It allows it to be ready to fire much faster than this one with its farther travel. It's kind of like rolling a big wheel versus rolling a small wheel. You take the little wheel, it'll roll one turn much faster than the big tire wheel. But the benefit, like I said, of having a longer stroke is torque. That's why diesel pistons, their connecting rods are very long. Like the Power Stroke diesel, its connecting rods are very, very long to allow a big stroke, and just you get a lot of torque out of that, which is with a little two-stroke or just a regular motor, you don't have as much travel, you don't get as much torque, but you can get more power, more speed out of it. Now, a two-stroke, like I mentioned, the four-stroke has 4 strokes, and one of them is a power stroke or an ignition stroke, whatever you want to call it. A two-stroke has 2 strokes, like the name, and 1 stroke out of the 2 is a power stroke, which is where that extra power comes from. This, 25% of the time, is making power. This, 50% of the time, is making power. So, this thing has to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then out of one of those, it's firing. On a two-stroke, it's fire, 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 and it can produce much more power from a much smaller piston and engine. This is the cylinder, and this is this thing's cylinder, and they're about the same size cylinder-wise, but you gotta think, the motor is, let's see, here is the bottom of the motor. That right there is all it is. That is the full motor. If you take the piston and you ever so gracefully push it into the cylinder, ever so graciously, which this thing doesn't have the bushings and bearings. That's it. That is the full motor. It's much, much lighter than this thing. Even though this has the flywheel on it, it still is much, much lighter than the four-stroke. Now I hope I can get my piston back out. There we go. But that is why a two-stroke, you can have, see, my two-stroke, my dirt bike is a 200cc. This piston right here, I believe, is a 400cc. I think, I'm not entirely sure. This come off of an opposed Briggs, 18 horsepower, I think, 18 and a half. This is the 50cc racing two-stroke motor. This is another weed eater. And this is the weed eater, or the chainsaw that you just saw. And I just have another one of these. Just the piston. But one thing that I want to show you, and this is really nothing to do with making power or whatever, but if you look at this little dinky piston, this come out of a Poland. A weed eater. This thing has, like, look at that. Its bearings are junk. Just very poorly made. The connecting rod is pathetic looking. The bearings, needle bearings in there are pathetic. Poland Pro, very cheap weed eater. That's what you get. That's why. This is a Troy-built piston. It come out of a Troy-built weed eater. Now, the weed eater itself is a little bit bigger in power, but look at that connecting rod. That is so much better than the Poland poop piece of crap. I have this clevis in it just because I kind of have it as like a lanyard pull. But you take that off, and look how well the bearings are still very good. They're pressed in what looks like, I don't know if this is welded together from like a spot welder, or it's not pressed. I know that each side might be pressed, but it's not a one-piece piston. But this is just, it's so much better quality than that. And this, the reason why this piston is out is because the motor for this thing, which actually is over here, this motor right here, oh, about dropped it. The motor wouldn't run for squat, so I yanked the thing apart, took it all apart, changed out the rings and piston, which is why this one is out of it. This was the old one. Still yet haven't run that motor yet. Haven't really. The weed eater itself was just poor quality, so we just kind of quit fooling with it. But the quality, you put what you know, you get your money's worth. If you go out and you know, something that regularly costs you $100, $150, and you